We're in John chapter 6, starting in verse 1. After this, after what? Jesus healed the man at the pool of Bethesda and explained to all who were listening, he is God. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now, the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing the crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in this place, so the men sat down, and about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is come into the world." Perceiving then they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So this is quite possibly one of the most famous stories in all of the Bible, certainly in the Gospels, Jesus feeding the 5,000. This is one of those stories that we have in other Gospels. Most people have heard this, particularly if you've been in church for a while. And usually when people read this story or hear this story, the focus is always on Jesus feeding 5,000 people. And what an amazing miracle that was. And this is highlighted as one of his greatest miracles because he was able to take something so small, I like to call it the Lunchables. He took a little boy's Lunchables and feed 5,000 people. And this is certainly a great takeaway. This is certainly something that happened. This is always a great reminder for us that God has no limits. He can do whatever he wants with whatever we're able to give him. These are great reminders. But for those of you who have been sitting through significant portions of this John study, does it seem consistent that John wrote this story simply to wow us with Jesus' miracle? Or do you think John maybe had something else in mind? As a reminder, John is a theologian writing a theological text. His gospel is not just a chronological story of what happened. He is writing this several decades after the other gospels were already written, and John is very intentionally highlighting very specific parts of Jesus' ministry to tell very specific points. And so while we celebrate the fact that Jesus was able to feed 5,000 people with such little food, there's actually a lot more going on here. In fact, that John tells this story when Matthew already told it should give us a hint that John is trying to tell us something that Matthew didn't. In fact, I want to share with you some very important details, or one important detail rather, of how Matthew tells this very story. One of my favorite sermons that I've ever preached, I didn't preach it here, I preached it somewhere else, but it's called The Longest Day in the Bible. And the reason why I called it The Longest Day in the Bible is whenever we're looking at Matthew's version of this story, we get some context of that Jesus's, some of his mightiest miracles. including feeding the 5,000 and including walking on water, all happened in the same day, but it came after some very important news. Matthew 14, let's look at verse 8 if you're there. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." And the king was sorry because of his oath and his guest. He commanded it to be given. So he sent and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl named Salome. There we go. And she brought it to her mother, and his disciples came and took the body and buried them and went and told Jesus, verse 13. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. And that is the beginning of how Matthew tells the story of feeding 5,000 people. John tells us Jesus made the decision to go up a mountain to be by himself, but he doesn't tell us why. And it's because John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin and the prophet who was able to call Jesus Messiah first, he was just martyred. So in Matthew's version of the story, Jesus went up on the mountain alone to pray and grieve. And he was praying and grieving all night, and it was after praying and grieving all night that he saw the hungry people and fed them, walked across the water. All of that happened in one 24-hour period, but it was prefaced that Jesus was grieving. John doesn't tell us that. Why? So much of the rest of John's gospel is heavily devoted to learning about John the Baptizer. We have more information about John the Baptizer in this gospel than the rest of the gospels combined. Why would John leave it out? Because in Matthew, as we're just telling the story of what happened, we see that Jesus' miracles were driven by compassion, that he was able to be grieved as a human is grieved, and we see all kinds of other motivations, and it's the motivations that are driving the narrative. That's not what John is wanting to highlight in this story. He's not changing the story. Remember, everybody who read this gospel had already memorized Matthew. They knew the story. John was highlighting specific parts of the story so that we could get a takeaway. And again, the theme of John's gospel is that Jesus is the one and only Messiah. So, John is emphasizing something that Matthew did not. Here's what he's emphasizing when we go back to John. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing to the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat alone with his disciples. Now the Passover feast of the Jews was at hand. What John needs us to know for this story is that it's the Passover feast. Because John is about to give us a bunch of very interesting and very pointed comparisons to Moses. The underlying theme of all of John 6 is that Jesus is better than Moses. And we are going to see this throughout our narrative today, next week, and it culminates at the end of the chapter. So we have Exodus imagery, Moses background, and a wilderness theme. So this is all here. John is planting seeds here that Jesus will fully explain later in the chapter. So I don't want to preach 2 weeks from now's message today, but I am going to show you some of the things that are in there, but there's another takeaway that we can have here. First of all, as an aside, I want to point out the Philip and the Andrew thing. This is really fun. Philip, Jesus asks Philip, of all the guys who were there, hey, Phil, not Pete, not John, not James, hey, Phil, how are we going to feed 5,000 people? And that's kind of what Philip said. Now, there's two possible reasons for this. One is, this is where Philip was from. He's from this region. He was probably familiar with this mountaintop, and he was probably familiar with all of the shops and markets that were around that conceivably you could have bought 5,000 sandwiches from. Obviously, that wasn't true, because the Bible also tells us that Jesus was testing him because he already knew what he was going to do. But what Philip is doing in the story is giving humans that can't perform miracles on our own context for the impossible. Because if Philip was just walking around and going, well, Jesus, what I would do is probably just perform a miracle, you lose some of the importance of what was happening. You need to feel, as the human beings that we are, Philip's humanity in this moment. Philip, what would you do to feed 5,000 people? I can't even conceive of enough money to feed these many people. And this should turn your brain into saying, Philip, what would you do with the impossibly sick? I can't do anything for them. What would you do with the dead who are right in front of you? I can't do any. What would you do with your own sin? I can't. And so we're getting Philip as this foil for God's divinity here, because again, we're needing to see Jesus as divine, fully divine, truly God, truly man. But then we also have Andrew. Andrew is given 3 highlights in all of the Gospels. We've already seen one of them. Do you remember what it was, what Andrew did? He brought somebody to Jesus. What did he do right here? Brought somebody to Jesus. The third time that we read about Andrew, do you know what he's doing? Bringing people to Jesus. This is Andrew's entire motif. If you ever see Andrew, it's because he's bringing somebody to Jesus. And this is a great place for those of us who don't know what to do. Just be like Andrew. I don't have the answers, but I will bring you to someone who has them. So what we have here, I'm going to highlight some of these things that we have from the Exodus story so that you can see them. Jesus is in the wilderness. Moses and Israel were in the wilderness. The people were hungry. Israel was hungry in the wilderness. There was no food readily available for Jesus to feed them. There was no food readily available for Moses to feed Israel. Jesus provided bread. Moses was given manna from heaven. Am I making sense so far? Amen. So all of this is pointing out that where Moses had to receive manna from heaven, God in Christ could make it. Amen. Jesus is the better Moses. We see some more fun details in all of this. Sunday school question. How many baskets of food were left over? 12. How many tribes are in Israel? 12. This is not a coincidence. The symbolism here is very clear that the Messiah is sufficient for all. Thank you, Jesus. He's not come just for Judah. He's not come just for the Levites. He has come for all of God's people. And by extension, we know eventually he will come for the entire world. But we're trying to make the symbolic point here that in the same way that manna was sufficient to feed all of Israel, through Christ there is an abundance in all of Israel. There's leftovers. I did a lot of research to try to figure out what happened to the leftover food, and the scholastic consensus seems to be probably somebody ate it. We don't know. We don't know. In case anybody was ever curious about whatever happened to that. Am I the only one? Did anybody else ever have that question? I really like leftovers.
Well, you said don't waste it.
Yeah, he said don't waste it. That's exactly right. Somebody had to eat it. This is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, fellas. Eat it up. So, this is a lot of the symbolism that's happening here, but this is a real event. This really did happen, and the crowd really was involved. The 5,000 we know about was fed. Of course, other Gospels tell us that just the men were counted. Women and children were also there. We don't know. This is why we call it 5,000, because that's the number that we have. Could have been 10, could have been 20,000 people. And even though the people were there, and even though they even ate the food themselves, they watched the miracle, they watched it multiply, and they experienced the miracle of a full stomach from that, they misunderstood what they saw.
Is there any significance that Peter offered up somebody's lunch?
That Andrew did?
No, Andrew was talking about the money, but didn't Peter say, I got a boy here that's got loaves and fish?
That was Andrew.
Oh, was that Andrew?
Yes, sir.
Oh, because it was Philip and Andrew.
Yeah, it was Andrew, Philip, Peter's brother. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, is there any significance to that? What's good? A few fish and some bread.
Well, yeah.
5,000 people.
That's literally what he says. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? So I think the significance there is Andrew has this motif where he doesn't really know what the answer is, but he knows that Jesus is going to be where the answer comes from. And so, I don't know, Jesus, we got a Lunchables. What are you going to, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to understand it, but.
The other guy didn't offer anything.
Right, he's just like, nah, impossible.
I
Yeah.
just can imagine them trying to actually go around and give food to 5,000 people.
Yeah.
Because if you're even served 200 people, it takes time.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time.
Where are those baskets?
Well, you think there's some significance that is that you don't waste anything? Because I'm sitting there thinking about that. Because he made a point of saying, where to go? Don't waste it. But
Yeah.
is that something
Yeah.
significant that relates to
Manna.
manna?
Yeah, so as a reminder, in the Old Testament with manna, you only got manna for one day. Anything that was left over would turn into worms, except if you were collecting the day before the Sabbath so that you didn't have to pick food on the Sabbath. So that, yeah, he's drawing all of his attention to don't keep this, basically, is what it is. It's you're going to eat what you need, get a full stomach, but then you've got to give over what's left. So it's not, I'm not here for hoarding. We're not here to fill your pockets. I'm not trying to get your pantry full. I'm feeding you for this moment right now. And this actually gives us more information when we get to the end of the chapter in 2 weeks about him being the bread of life, that you have to continuously come back. So now you guys don't have to be here in 2 weeks to just preach that message. But the people, even though they saw everything, they got something terribly, terribly wrong. So they gathered them up, filled the 12 baskets with the fragments, and when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who's to come into the world. Now, my translation has that word prophet capitalized, as though that's a name, that's a proper name. Well, who are they talking about? Great question. I'll tell you. In Deuteronomy 18, verse 18, Moses is speaking. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is him you shall listen, just as you desired for the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly when you said, let me not hear again. So, sorry, that was long. The Lord your God will rise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. Israel had taken Deuteronomy 18:18 for centuries at this point and assumed that another Moses was going to come. Not the Messiah, but another Moses was going to come, or another David was going to come, or another Elijah was going to come. But these weren't always thought of as the Messiah. These were thought of as prophets, as just other mortal men gifted by God to do something for the nation of Israel. And so they said, this must be the prophet. Why would they say that? Because they saw all of the Exodus symbolism. They saw the large group of people in the wilderness. They saw the being fed miraculous bread. They saw all of this, and they said, Moses has returned. And then this happens. We got it. We can't read past this. One of the most significant things in all of Jesus' life and ministry takes place in a breath. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Jesus was offered the kingship of Israel multiple times, and he rejected it multiple times. But I need us to hear the language that was happening in this, because Christ is king. Christos Rex is becoming, actually, it's Latin for Christ is king, is becoming a banner for young men in America and the United States right now. There's a revival happening of sorts amongst young men. Christ is king is something that is said. People are getting it tattooed on their body. They're putting it all over the place. Christ is king. That's true. So why would Jesus reject what was happening right here? Is he not king? So why would he reject it? Any thoughts?
Not that kind of.
He's not of this kingdom.
Okay, that's definitely part of it.
He's king of the universe, he's not king of one place.
That's definitely part of it. That's definitely part of it too.
Put it all together. Sum it up. Do we need?
He hasn't risen yet.
It's definitely part of it. It's
a test.
it's in the text. The answer's in the text. The answer's always in the text. By force. We do not force Jesus into anything. We submit to our King. And that is the crucial thing that these people got wrong, that we still get wrong today, that we believe we can force Christ to be in our image and work our way according to our will. But as we all were able to point out, there is a timing to all of this. He needed to die and he needed to rise. We have to understand kingship on different terms, not just of the nation of Israel, the king of all kings. He has a spiritual kingdom that surpasses borders of any nation. And he's not here. Jesus never came for any of our agendas, but his own agenda. And this is why consistently he has always denied when people tried to make him king. When Satan offered it to him in Matthew 4, he denied it. When the people here tried to take him, he denied it. And there's another time where people took him, and he always denied it because it was not the right time, it was not for the right reason, and it was not for the right kingdom. So that's the other part of this particular story. Yeah, Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. By the way, how old were the fish? Because you've got 2 options. One, that kid was sitting on day-old fish. Or 2, he was fishing when Jesus was preaching.
Well, they were salty.
They were probably salty. So, but what I want us to hold on to in our minds over next week and the week after that is all of John chapter 6 is pointing to, remember in John chapter 5, Jesus is God himself. So he's already confronted Israel with, I'm God. Now he has to confront Israel with, Moses can't save you. I'm better than he is. You have to abandon Moses for me. So this is what we're doing in chapter 6. So it's a lot in here, a lot of symbolism, a lot of imagery. Who's got questions or insights, things that you'd like to share with the group?